President Donald Trump and the Chinese President Xi Jinping met in Beijing. There were a lot of teas: the trade, technology, tariffs, Taiwan, and even the Middle East were all on the table. And for the Gulf capitals that spent decades deepening their ties with China in terms of technology and other stuff and trade, they also at the same time they were deepening their ties with the United States in terms of security. I'm Joe Kawly, and on this special episode I'm joined by my colleague Mitchell, who covers China for NBN, and also our guest Henry Tugendhat from the Washington Institute, who tracks Chinese activity across the Middle East and North Africa. Thank you for joining us. Let's start with the question that everyone is thinking about. What were the takeaways? What is one sentence that you would think about after this summit?
I think the main takeaway was that they met. That was significant in and of itself, that the conversation has restarted. This was the first time in, I think, 9 years since a U.S. president has visited China. And so just in terms of reestablishing direct lines of communication, that matters. These are the two largest economies in the world, and their relationship matters for everyone. More broadly than that, though, it's a challenge to say what concretely came out of this, right? There were big hopes on both sides. Trump was hoping to come out of this with some big trade deals that he could point to, some big wins on the economic front, and there doesn't seem to be much on that front. China was going into this talking a lot about Taiwan, but we've come out of this on the other side, and there doesn't appear to be much change on the U.S. position vis-a-vis Taiwan. So it's possible that this is the holding pattern that will continue until their next meeting in September in the U.S. But for now, it's really just a restarting of conversations, as far as I would view it.
It's very interesting to me that President Xi brought up this, one may say, a new framework for the U.S. China relations, which he talked about building a constructive China-U.S. relationship of strategic stability. What's your view on that? I mean, both sides go in wanting a stable relationship. And do you think this summit, the whole theater, achieved that?
I mean, ultimately, I think what Xi is hoping for is a reversion to the trade relationship they had before the first Trump administration. I mean, that was really the golden age of U.S. China trade, certainly from the Chinese perspective, right? And it has been one battle after another for China ever since then. And so I think, at the very least, from the Chinese perspective, Xi was hoping to set a floor in the relationship from which they could rebuild their economic interests. And so, as far as I understand this new policy proposal that Xi has laid out, we don't have the substance of it yet. It's really just a placeholder for the definition of a new form of relationship. But I think what he's trying to get at is, please can we stop the tit-for-tat trade wars, and please can we find ways to trade more freely once again. Now, of course, there are reasons why the U.S. began these trade wars. They felt that there were imbalances in the trade relationship, and it's unclear the extent to which much has changed since 2016, since Trump came in the first time. But certainly, Xi is trying to, at the very least, prevent further damage and rebuild economic opportunities where possible.
You said he's preventing, but what do you think Beijing or Xi Jinping think they got out of this summit?
I think they are probably very pleased at the optics of the meeting. I think they're probably very happy about the fact that the whole theater of the meeting presented Xi and Trump as equals, and in fact Trump really fed into that narrative that they were creating around that, with Trump calling it a G2 meeting and talking about the significance of it on those terms. So I'm sure they're happy with that. I think look, I don't know what they discussed in their private meetings. I'm sure there was a lot that we don't know yet and that might come out in the coming days. So I can't speak to the extent to which they feel like they got something or didn't get something out of the private meetings. But certainly they have a very strong interest in resetting this economic relationship at this time of great economic vulnerability for China, right? I mean, they are going through, or they have been going through a period of deflation that has only just temporarily been halted by this Iran war that has reversed that a little bit, but it's not solved the inherent problems within China's domestic economy.
So before the summit, folks were talking about their 3 T's, right?
Yes.
So we talk about trade, tariff, we talk about
Taiwan.
The third T, I think it's Tehran. So in this case,
I thought you were going to say technology. But Tehran as well, yes.
Tehran as well, yeah, there are a lot of T's. But in this case, one thing I think out of the summit, President Trump, before he left Beijing, they were having tea and he was talking to the reporters. He said he and President Xi both agree that the Strait of Hormuz should be reopened. This war should be resolved peacefully. It seems like on Tehran, they have some kind of consensus, at least publicly, that both sides are willing to be on the same side of
publicly.
it.
Will
right.
China is. So here's the question that everyone is asking: Is it from the optics, as you mentioned? It's good for China from the optics. But in terms of policy and on the big stage worldwide, China's interest is to see the United States weakened. So when President Trump came to this meeting with no T solved, like Tehran solved, the Strait of Hormuz is not opened, is it from their interest to help Trump fix this T, the Tehran situation problem? Or, no, I'm not going to help you because it's from my benefit? Or is it the economic benefits for Beijing to fix the Iran issue?
Yeah, I mean, look, China definitely has interests in seeing this war being resolved, and they are definitely hoping that this war will be resolved soon. So I think the most significant development on the Iran front was just seeing Xi Jinping agree with Trump that we would like to see an end to the blockade, and we don't think that there should be tolls, effectively, over the shipping that's coming out of the Strait. And so, tacitly, I think Xi Jinping is saying that Iran will need to make some concessions as well. Whether that actually means that Xi Jinping is going to be committing any resources to doing so, I don't think that's likely, right? I don't think they're going to be diverting any strategic assets from their near abroad, from Taiwan, from the South China Sea, in order to make this a reality. That is very much Trump's problem, and for every day that this passes, that is still Trump's issue to resolve. They are not going to get mixed up in that. They don't want to damage their relationship with Iran, and equally they don't want to damage their relationship with the broader Middle East states, with whom they have far deeper and richer relationships in some cases than they do with Iran.
Right, like you have researched this, and NBN, we have this China tracker. So we tracked China's oil imports from the region. Of course, China buys 80 to 90% Iran's oil, but Iran's oil for China, it only accounts for about like 13%. The reality is there that Iran needs China much more than China needs Iran, economically and on every front. So this has been a very interesting relationship. It is sort of like this brotherhood they built over decades, but in reality, it's very transactional for China. And I think this time around, everyone in the region was looking like. What they're going to do about Iran? Is there any major announcement going to come out of this? I sort of, my sense is yes, they agreed on the key issues, but that's very, it's like not superficial, but it's like something that everybody would agree on. Who doesn't want the Strait to be reopened?
So from their seat, from the Gulf seat, like Abu Dhabi, Riyadh, Doha, do they see the same deliverables that you mentioned, or they see it differently?
You're asking, does Riyadh, Doha see the same deliverables?
Deliverables that you just mentioned out of this summit, or they watch it, they see it from a different lens, from their own interests.
Or how should they read the signals from China from this meeting?
I see, yeah. I don't know how much there is for them to hang on from the outcome of this meeting, but certainly I think I would be very surprised if China was not working through diplomatic back channels very consistently with Doha, Riyadh, Dubai, you name it, because they want to safeguard the fact that they do not want to be seen completely in hoc to Iranian interests on this, and they do not want to be seen as part of the problem, effectively. So I don't know if Riyadh and Doha and so forth are going to come out of this saying, okay, great, there's a resolution here, and China's going to be part of the solution. But certainly, I would imagine that China's most significant diplomacy with them is going to be happening behind closed doors.
Right. So leading up to the summit, as you know, Wang Yi has been making phone calls. People are calling China. There are a lot of behind-the-scene diplomatic efforts that China did, which
as a mediator.
Yes, and then which also encouraged Pakistan to step in to be the public mediator in this. So you foresee after the summit, or let's just say this next phase of this conflict, China will stay engaged
with
the
broader Middle East?
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, China's relationship with the broader Middle East is very significant because it doesn't just concern all of the energy flows, right? I mean, they've already got plenty of oil interests that are coming out. Saudi Arabia being the biggest oil provider to China. Iraq is a huge provider as well, and China's been investing in Iraq for the last 20 years, basically, since the Iraq War. And so this is devastating because all of the Iraqi oil comes through the Persian Gulf. You can talk about diversion to the Mediterranean, but that's not going to help the flows to China, really, in the short term. So China has massive interests in that regard, but it also has interests in terms of what it's selling. It's selling EVs, it's selling solar panels, it's trying to sign deals on innovations that China is developing that it's hoping will take China across the threshold from a middle-income country to a high-income country. You've probably heard the expression before, it wants to get rich before it gets old, and it definitely wants to escape the middle-income trap. And so having rich countries like those in the Gulf who are interested markets in what China has to sell is very significant to that economic ambition for an export-driven economy, especially when they're in the midst of a trade war with Europe, the North Americans, and everybody else in the OECD, basically.
But China, to go back to what Min was trying to say, China and Xi Jinping, they position themselves as close to Tehran, and they are the mediator, but not only in terms of this war, but also the mediator between Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, and Iran. So they have close ties.
Right.
When President Trump has a very rigid idea and how he sees Iran right now, that's why they launched the war. That's why we have Operation Fury. They wanted to dismantle the regime or change or see some change happening in Iran. It didn't come with the package before this summit. When President Xi listens to this, does this complicate his position as a mediator or how his ties are? Because can China have close ties to Iran and also try to cultivate all the T's that we talked about, the tariffs, the technology,
with the U.S.
Yes.
you're saying. Yeah, so certainly that's the point of pressure that the U.S. is trying to leverage right now. And we saw that immediately before this summit happened. The Trump administration launched the most significant tariffs related to Iran on China, right? They sanctioned Hengli petrol refinery and 40 shipping companies related to the shadow fleet that carries Iranian oil to China.
Yeah.
So I think though that pressure is legitimate from the US perspective in that they're saying, look, you are the biggest buyer of Iranian oil, and were you to stop buying Iranian oil, then we would be, then they would be in a weaker position and they would be forced to negotiate a settlement. And so you're actually backstopping this regime more than anybody else by financing them. From the Chinese perspective, they would certainly see that point of view to some extent, but I think that they are thinking of this much more broadly, in that they are thinking, look, you are just opportunistically using the Iran war as an excuse to sanction a major Chinese oil refinery at a time of great economic stress for us already. And it's only because you lost the Supreme Court case in February about the 10% fentanyl tariffs. And so you lost that point of leverage in your negotiations with China. And so therefore, you're drawing on this new opportunity to put pressure on us so that you've got something to negotiate with us. And sure enough, today we've seen in some of the reporting that Trump has already said, he's up for discussing the sanctions on the Hengli oil refinery. To answer your question in that roundabout way, it's difficult because the US does genuinely really care about Chinese support for Iran. But I think they also recognize the fact that if China was to stop buying Iranian oil, that would be a major policy shift for China and something that China really doesn't want to do, partly because it makes it look like they are acquiescing to US demands and may risk making them look weak. It may risk looking like a betrayal to an old partner. And so they're going to avoid that at all costs. And on top of that, I would say, this sanctioning of the refinery is a strong amount of pressure from the US regime. Certainly it's already having impact on that refinery and its subsidiaries and its ability to sell. But it's not what's going to completely stop Chinese purchases of Iranian oil, of course. That is a far deeper and richer network.
And I think both sides understand where their limits, the bottom lines are, and especially in terms of Iran in this case. These are like the major aspects of this summit that everyone's been talking about. But as someone who studied China for years, especially on the economy side of things, are there other signals or other things that you observed from the summit that you think it's worth noting to our listeners and audience in the region?
I can't say that they gave us much to hang on. I mean, it was really...
the readouts are pretty general, I would say.
Very general, yeah. I mean, we discussed a little bit before the show started about Trump's comments this morning about the weapon sales to Taiwan, that they were still up for... He was still considering it. Despite the fact that they've already been approved by Congress. There was some concerned reporting around that, but
Yeah, the Taiwan issue, to go back to that, many in Northeast Asia, in the region, were very concerned, and of course, it's a global issue now. But looking at what she had said about Taiwan this time, some people are thinking that, he's using the language he's never used before. It's a elevated language on Taiwan, because he said if mishandled, the U.S. China, two sides can collide or even clash. Do you read much into the language, or he's pretty much stating the same position. And President Trump didn't really respond to it. But Secretary Rubio, when on NBC News, took this interview and talked about how the policy is unchanged.
I didn't see it as a significant change within China's stance. I mean, certainly, they passed legislation in the early 2000s saying that if Taiwan declared independence, then they would go to war over it. And I see this as effectively a veiled threat to the U.S. that this is their stance and this is how they would respond. And to your point, I agree. I don't think Trump really rose to it in that moment, and I think certainly his reflections on the flight home this morning suggested that he has absorbed what Xi Jinping thinks about it and says about it, and he understands the significance that Xi Jinping places on it, and he hasn't made a decision yet. I don't think that Trump has given away any significant change in U.S. policy towards Taiwan as a response to that statement from Xi Jinping. And you could read it in the broader context of Takaichi's comments last year in terms of, if there was a Taiwan contingency, then that would necessarily involve Japan. But I don't think, and so I'm sure Xi Jinping and the Chinese government are all very aware of this language being out in the public sphere for the first time in a long time. But I don't think, again, that Trump really conceded anything in what we've seen, at least publicly.
Right. And for the Gulf countries or the Middle East in general, Taiwan seems far away. Seems like a Asian issue, or at least the U.S. China issue.
So that T is not the T, as in Taiwan, does not interest them.
Yeah.
But there's another T that interests them, which is the technology and specifically AI competition. And when the Chinese leadership saw American CEOs, which, like, in my opinion, I didn't know, why they needed to be there. But to ask you, when they saw these CEOs in the summit or at the summit in the meetings, what did that signal to them about the AI competition? Also, how the Gulf are seeing this, because the Gulf countries have a huge interest in the AI tools and technologies of the United States. So where does that sit, you think?
Yeah.
In Taiwan, I think Taiwan plays an important role.
Yes, no, great.
But they don't know, so this is why we have to explain this whole competition with AI and the competition with the U.S. Where does it sit, and what does it mean for those Gulf countries?
Right.
Yes, great question. Well, so the first thing I would say is you should absolutely read work on this topic by my colleagues Elizabeth Dent and Grant Rumley, who've done great research on where the Middle East sits.
Maybe we'll have her next time.
I hope so.
Brent.
With Andrew here.
Yes.
But just to answer briefly in the context of this trip, certainly the message from the Trump administration going into the trip was that semiconductors are not up for negotiation, they're not up for discussion, therefore we won't be bringing Jensen Huang, basically. And it was really at the 11th hour that Jensen Huang was included in the trip, and we don't know quite how that happened.
He hatched a ride in Anchorage on Air Force One.
Oh, wow.
Yes, there was. Yeah, did you see the pictures of him with the backpack on the tarmac? Yeah. But so it's unclear how that came about. So some people say, oh, Trump was the one to say, why isn't he on the trip? Others say that Jensen Huang had some good lobbying efforts at the last minute. Either way, the result was that the message quickly changed to semiconductors are on the table for negotiation. And then sure enough, in the process of the discussions, we saw the statement that H200 chips would now become available under the premise that China would self-report that they wouldn't use them for military use, and NVIDIA would self-report that they wouldn't be depleting stockpiles that were necessary for US uses. A lot of the conversation between the US and Gulf countries was around which chips they were allowed to buy, and creating firewalls so that they couldn't sell those chips on through back channels to China. And so this just eases the pressure on this category of chips, at least for now.
Beyond the region, Lebanon, the Horn of Africa, Maghreb, all those sit inside or outside this situation, because also China has huge soft power in these countries. On top of my mind, I can say that China is building a huge opera house in Lebanon. And
I didn't know that.
in all my upbringing, I never
Wow.
felt the soft power of China in Lebanon. Being raised there, it was always the U.S. soft power. Is this another battle between the two countries in outside of the Gulf areas? And how
I think,
dangerous
yeah.
it is, because I think China is playing this card really well.
Yeah, I think it is often conceived as a competition. The Chinese soft power versus the Western soft power, or the US soft power. And it is often framed in terms of development finance and aid and all sorts of different measures of it, Confucius Institutes, scholarships. And I think it's very important to pick apart where and how China is engaging in those forms of soft power. Because I don't think it necessarily translates into a straight competition in every regard. So you brought up the example of the Opera House. Infrastructure is definitely a huge area that China has been engaged in Africa, Latin America, the Middle East, Southeast Asia, South Asia, you name it. And yet, this may also be an Achilles heel of China's relationship with a lot of these countries.
How?
Because for the poorer countries that have borrowed money to pay for this infrastructure, we're beginning to see debt defaults.
So it's a trap.
No, I don't think it's a debt trap. It's
Not that far.
I don't think China lent with the intention of creating this friction. In fact, quite the opposite. I think China thought that it would be a virtuous cycle where these countries needed the infrastructure. China had lots of surplus US dollars to lend based on its trade model. And it had a lot of surplus capacity, basically. And so this was a great opportunity to lend the money to export Chinese goods and services that those countries would pay for over the long term. And they hoped and believed that sovereign countries would not default on debts. Companies go to default, not countries. But in many ways, it was the same miscalculation as the Western countries of the 1960s and 70s. The reality is China is a lender, and China is very visible, as you say, for having lent for so much infrastructure. So when people say, should the US jump into competing with Chinese lending for infrastructure, because it's not something that we typically do, I would caution that this really isn't the right moment in history to plow into this kind of funding model just for the sake of a bit of soft power diplomacy, if that's the competition that you think you want to wage. I would argue a much better area to compete on soft power would be educational scholarships or training within country.
For the United States to do,
for the United States.
Yeah.
China currently absolutely dominates in scholarships for universities. And the US has not focused on that so much for a long time. And so they risk not having the same depth of relationships. So I think it is something to be taken very seriously in terms of US soft power competition.
And Min, you think what our audience and the people in the region should watch for in the next 3 months, since you are in charge of the China tracker at MBN? Are there dates, summits, meetings that we should be aware of?
Yeah, so for President Trump and President Xi, they will at least meet for another 3 times this
Really?
year. Yes.
Oh.
So President Trump extended an invitation to President Xi to do a return visit in the U.S. in September. That's when the United Nations General Assembly happens. So President Xi will go to New York, and then he'll come to D.C. for a state visit. And also there is another two major summits, one in Shenzhen later this year. That's for, I think, APAC. And then another one in Miami, Florida. Later this year. So, tentatively, they would have another 3 meetings this year. I think after this summit, like what Henry just said, this is a moment that they sort of rebuild the relationship or strengthen the relationship. I think in the short term, we'll see the bilateral relations will be less intense, but in the long run, because of this fundamental structure of these two countries' relations, there will still be fractions, there will still be things they have to butt heads. But I think this summit, at least at this moment, served the purpose to allow these two countries, especially the U.S., to take a breath, with the situation in Iran.
So basically, it was optics then. And can we say that hard files and topics were discussed and solved, or no?
Well, I don't think China necessarily felt the need to sign any great deals or great concessions in this first opening round, given that they knew that Trump wanted 3 more meetings, right? And so I would imagine that what was established in these meetings was the areas of importance to each side and the beginnings of a conversation of how they're going to horse trade around those interests. So I think Trump was probably frustrated that he didn't get to come back and say, look, here's this great deal that I've already negotiated. But certainly, I don't think that it was realistic to think that China was ever going to do that, given that it knew that it had 3 more meetings to get through this year. And it is trying to be very strategic about what it gets out of this ultimately.
So the question basically then, in the next 12 months or the next 6 months, if the conversation did not move to the harder files, where is the situation? Where are we?
Well, if you're suggesting that was it a waste of time, I don't think it was a waste of time.
I think China, like you said, is being very patient, playing the long game. They're also looking at the U.S. midterm elections, where the domestic situation is going to go for Mr. Trump, and also he has a term. This term will finish in 2.5 years. And in terms of Taiwan, I think China also feels like time is sort of on their side. From what we saw from this summit, China showed a lot of patience not to. They put the mark down on Taiwan. But on other stuff, did they really deliver? Not really, but did they not deliver? They gave President Trump a lot of face. So,
absolutely. Well, and I think also even in the run-up to this meeting, China's response to the sanctions that the U.S. imposed on the oil refinery was to invoke these blocking rules. And this is a new policy that they created about 5 years ago, and this is the first time they've invoked it, and the idea is that it makes it illegal for Chinese companies to comply with U.S. sanctions. And this is the first time a country has ever tried this, and so it'll be an important and interesting test case for China and other countries. But I think what's interesting about it as well was that by invoking the law and not yet applying it in full measure, because it effectively gives Chinese companies the opportunity to sue any institution or any company, either domestic or foreign, that complies with the U.S. sanction in such a way that hurts their economic interests, and that hasn't yet happened, as it were. By just putting this card on the table, I think it was significant in that in previous rounds of the trade war between the U.S. and China, China has typically responded with a counterattack of some kind by blocking off rare earths or sanctions of its own. And so I think what China is preparing for here is it's saying, look, we don't want to do anything to antagonize the US ahead of these big meetings, and now that the meetings are over, they are holding the threat of invoking those blocking rules more substantially over the coming months, but they haven't yet counterattacked because they still think that this is at least a baseline from which they can achieve something. But I think your point about the midterms is very significant because as we get closer, they may feel like Trump is in a tighter position to give away things that he may not have previously.
So we have a lot to watch for the next 3-4 months from now till the end of the year as well. Things might change a lot. Henry Tugendhat, thank you for being with us. And I think we have to reconvene to see if the hard files are going to be discussed or China is going to play the hard card, which is time, on its side, and what's going to happen at UNGA in New York, and as well as the results of the midterms. As for the audiences, I think please subscribe and listen to our podcast, subscribe to our newsletters. The China Tracker is very important to what China is doing and evolving politically, soft powers in the Middle East and the Gulf areas. And until next time, thank you.